Hey there gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Co channel, and this is a preview of Mythic Battles Isfet. Well, hey there gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Co channel. It's Professor Meg here, and today I have a preview of Mythic Battles Isfet. Thank you to Monolith Games for sponsoring this video, and as I said, this is a sponsored video. It is a preview that you can check out the link down below to see their campaign, and I highly suggest doing so. Some of these miniatures are really cool and insane. I'm going to show off a lot of the game to you, but I do highly suggest checking out everything that they have on their page and all the photos and things like that, and other people's gameplays. And also as a reminder, this is a prototype copy, so it's prototype, everything is subject to change. However, it's going to show you a lot about the basics of the game, what it's going to play like, what these miniatures will look like, but not necessarily the quality. And with that, I am going to jump into the preview of Mythic Battles Isfet. As a reminder as well, there is a playthrough on the channel that you can check out. I'm not sure if that will be before or after this, but you can also see that if you want to see some gameplay. Now, before we get started, something important to note about this game is that you can play it in multiple different modes. So there is a skirmish mode and also an adventure mode, but there's also a scenario mode. And for the scenario mode, there is the scenario book in which you can read all the text and different things will be happening. So there are a few different modes to play this, so I am going to go over the basics and how you'll play the game, but depending on the mode that you're playing, different things will happen and be added to the game. So again, as I said, highly suggest checking out their page, but with that, we are going to jump into it. Now, this game is going to have multiple different maps for you to play on, and that is, as I said, one of the differences is if you're just playing in skirmish mode, you may choose the map, but if you're playing in scenario mode, it'll tell you exactly which map to go and grab, and with that, you will build your different armies. Now, depending on the number of players, you'll be building armies out of these Egyptian-based people and monsters and creatures and gods and things like that you'll see there are these really great miniatures, both big and small, and they represent the different people that the armies will be made up out of. Now, depending on the number of players, you'll have a certain number of points to allocate to build up your armies, and you can see on these boards that some of the creatures have these bigger boards, and they will have a specific number of points. For example, we have Set here, who is worth 6, Amit, who is 5, Petsukos, who is 3, and Nenvis, who is 3. But there are also these smaller cards, which are your troops, and these ones will always cost you 1, but they will have different health amounts. And depending on the health will be how many miniatures that you have on the board. For example, you get 2 for these sauropods, and sauropods. They seem very scary and very adorable and cute. They're these little snake guys, but they're snake dogs and you should be afraid of them. But because there are 2, that represents that there's 2 health for these troops. So there are other troops such as these guards over here, and there are, I think, 3 of them. There are... Yes, 3. So that represents that this kind of unit would have 3 health for these troops. If you do 1 damage, you take 1 away. If you do another damage, you take another 1 away. And when they're down to just 1, they do lose their abilities, so they're a little bit less powerful. But this kind of represents how much health is actually on the board, that if you see a group of 3 in a specific area, that means you need to do 3 damage. Whereas for these bigger guys that have their own player boards, they have these sliders on here, and that's going to show what their health is, showing how much damage you need to do to them to knock them out. So their health will go down, basically starting at the highest. So if they're a very healthy creature, they could start it for 8, for example, and then go down to 1, whereas this little guy is a little bit weaker, so he starts at 6. Now, when you're composing your army, as I said, you'll have a specific number of points to be able to build it up. For example, we have a 2-player game set up here, which would be 18 points, and this grouping here represents the 18 points. So 6, 5, 3, 3, and 1. And you are also able to do other options. So for example, if I chose not to take this monster in with me, I would have those 3 additional points. I could grab other troops, but there are also these cards here that you're able to purchase to augment the different troops that you get. For example, this troop gains the guard talent. Now there are a whole lot of talents in this game. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I will go over some when I'm explaining what will be happening on the board. But for now, I'm just going over how you make up your armies. So this is just a few ways that you'll be able to enhance your troops if you choose to use your points in that way instead. For example, this one says this troop gains the gem collector talent, so it is just different ways to augment the groups that you have. Now, once you've made your army, they will give you a specific number of cards as well. So here's the deck for the player that was sitting over here, and you can see that they have Set. Set has 4 stars in this grouping. That means that they would have 4 cards that would be added to this deck, and that's when you're going to activate these different miniatures. Again, I'll go over the pace of play soon, but to talk about how you're building up your army and the deck building aspect of it, you would have 4 cards for Set, 4 for Amit, 4 for Pitsukos, 4 for Nenvis, and the Sauropods would give you only 3. So that would be all of the cards in here, and you and your opponent would both know that you are only able to activate that particular miniature that number of times. So for example, if Set is able to be activated 4 times, one of them is when you summon them, so one would be putting this into play simply to summon them to the board, and then after that you would have 3 more plays of them before you would need to reshuffle your deck and draw those cards again. Now there is one other type of card in the game called Art of War, and it's a placeholder card. It's this one over here, and this is one that is added to your deck both by the people that you choose to add to your army, as well as 3 at the beginning of the game, and these will be used to take additional actions and things like that. So when you are playing the game, as I said, you need a card to be able to activate that particular character, but once you do so, if you want to do an additional activation, or if you have special activations on their player boards that you want to do on future turns, you would need one of these in your hand to be able to discard from play to be able to do those different things. Alright, so once players have built their armies, they set them up on both sides, and they will have their troops summoned to the board so that you have an area to start with. You have a beginning summoning area, and that's where you'll be summoning all of your troops. For example, the player on this side would be able to summon here, 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 and here, and that is where they would be able to bring their different units into play. Alright, and once the game is set up and you have your armies built, there are these divine stones that are also placed around the board. There are specific places where they start, but they can be moved around because they are gathered by all of the different units, and they are actually absorbed by your main unit. Your main unit is your divinity, and on this side it is Set, and over here it is Isis, and those different characters would be able to absorb the divine stones, and the game end will trigger once a specific number of those divine stones have been absorbed by a specific player, or if another player is completely wiped out by the other team. Now, a certain way to do this, because you can only resummon specific types of characters, either if they have the ability to do so or if they're a troop, you can also try to kill the other player's divinity, and that would stop them from being able to absorb any of the divine stones, and therefore you would be able to win the game as well. So with that in mind, knowing that you are moving towards collecting and absorbing the divine stones as well as attacking your opponent, you'll be able to play the game through a few different phases. First, you'll start the turn and you will be able to trigger any beginning of round effects. You'll draw a card as the active player, and then you'll get to decide if you want to pass or continue. It is rare to pass, but it could be strategic. If you choose to pass, you'd be able to draw a card, but if you continue, you'll go on to that activation phase that I described. Once you go to the activation phase, you will need that specific card in your hand. So if you have that character's card, for example, Set here, you would play it from your hand and be able to activate that character. Now, when you do this, you choose from either simple actions or complex actions, and simple actions you're able to perform 2 of them, but complex actions you're only able to perform 1 of them. Now, a complex action, an example of that would be deploying the unit. So you could play the card once simply to be able to summon them to the board, and that counts as your only action for playing that card. A few other things that you would be able to do for just a complex action would be absorbing, which is when you absorb the divine stone into your divinity, or running, which is when you'd be able to move the same number of areas for your movement plus 1. Now, there are simple actions that you'll take as well, and simple actions, you can take 2 of them for 1 card play. So for example, I could play my Set card to attack twice. Now, it would be a simple attack, whereas they do also have special attacks here on their board. Those would count as only 1 action in activation, and some of them do require the Art of War cards to do so. But a simple attack would only be a simple action, meaning you would be able to do 2 of them, or you would be able to, for example, walk and then attack, because walk is also a simple action. Another simple action is claiming. So you'll be able to use your other units on the board to pick up the divine stones and take it to your divinity. So a simple action would be moving to the stone and then picking it up. That would be 2 simple actions, whereas once you bring it to your divinity, absorbing it would be a complex action. Once you do one activation, you can then choose to activate another unit. So if you have another card in your hand for a different unit, for example, if we had our Nenvis here, we would be able to activate them, but you can only do so if you discard an Art of War card with it. So you would have to be able to have both of these in your hand to do a second activation on your turn, but if you did, you could do so to take 2 different activations and hopefully gain control over your opponent for what you did. Now after that, you'll just go to the end of turn phase, but all of the phases are very important, especially start of turn and end of turn, because they can trigger different things. For example, this unit here has the Aura of Decay, which is at the end of their activation, make a 3 dice area attack in their area, so different things can trigger depending on the phases that you're in, and you can use that to kind of line things up and almost have an extra activation on that unit because they do something during different phases of the game. Now, units are going to have different talents, which will give them abilities that you are able to use throughout the game, but there is also different types of terrain. For example, this terrain here is quicksand, and that will affect the players and their movement, but there are also places that you are able to climb on top of, which may be able to give you an advantage and different things such as line of sight, but it also makes you a target for the opponent as well. There are also things like these aquatic areas, which can hinder your different abilities that you're using, so it can be really important where you line yourself up and which units you have in different terrain, because some of them will have abilities that could be useful depending on the type of terrain that you're in, such as flying, trying to get over certain areas, and things like that. So it's definitely a layer that is added to the game when you are looking at the different abilities and building your army. Alright, now taking a look at combat, as I said, when you have the troops, the amount of troops in a certain area represents the amount of health left for that unit, but for the ones that have different the character boards, you do just move this tracker down until they hit 0 health, but it does have all of their very important statistics for how they interact with each other during an attack. So if we look here over at Petsukos, his highest amount when he starts at the beginning of the game, he attacks for 6, his shield is 5, his range is 0, his movement is 2, and his health is 6. So for this guy, he would be able to roll 6 dice when attacking. Now, if we look over here, if he was attacking, say for example, Cleopatra, her shield starts at 7. Now that seems very high, but I'll show you how that would interact with each other, a 6 attack versus a 7 shield. So for a 6 attack, and I'm going to move these guys a little bit out of the way for this. For a 6 attack, you would roll 6 dice, but we are trying to hit 7s. So the most we can hope to do is damage her, but I think, we'll see what we can do. So these dice have a blank side on them, and then 1 through 5, so they are d6s, but it's a 1 through 5 plus a blank, meaning that you cannot roll a 6 on these, but you can use the 5s to add to what you roll. So I'll show you exactly what I mean now, and we will roll the 6 dice. Woo! I rolled 1 off screen, so we're just going to roll 1 more. Not even off screen, it went all the way to the floor. Okay, so this was a great roll because I am Professor Meg and that's the only thing I know what to do. So I'm going to augment this a little bit. I mean, she does have 7 shields, so that is pretty high, but I'm going to make one of these a blank just to show you what would happen there. So if you roll any blanks at all, they are immediately discarded. So this blank that I rolled would get discarded. And then looking at what I have a 5, 5, 4, 4, and a 2. Now, the 5s I'll be able to re-roll, meaning that if I get at least a 2 on these, it will do a damage to her. This counts as at least 5 damage towards the shields, and I'll be able to re-roll these, but I have 2 4s, which are not quite high enough to even be re-rolled for a 7. Now, I am able to discard this 2 to make one of the 4s a 5, meaning that I'll be able to now roll all 3 of these 5s, and this 4 I'll be able to hold on to augment later. You can discard a die to add +1, but that's all you can add. So we'll hold on to this one for now, and we'll re-roll these 3, hoping for at least 2s. This honestly isn't that bad of a roll. It's really not, you guys. I wish I rolled worse for the example. These are all 4s. So basically each of these would now be 9s because they started as 5s. You add the 4, so it's a 9 damage each, meaning that I would do 3 damage to her. But if I had rolled this instead. So if I had rolled a 4, a blank, and a 1, again, because one of them was a blank, it would be immediately discarded. The 4 would be a 9, so that would go through. And this one was a 5 plus the 1, but I would be able to discard this remaining 4 that I saved to make this a 2, meaning that I could do 2 damage, adding those up to 7. I hope that makes sense to you guys. I highly suggest checking out the playthrough that Alex and I did on the channel if you want to see how that actually adds up in the dice rolling. I found it was really satisfying rolling the dice and being able to add up to these different amounts, especially re-rolling the ones that were a full success and being able to discard dice to make them better, to add that +1. So I do suggest checking out the playthrough just to see exactly how this interacts, because I feel like explaining it is a bit different than seeing it in person. Alright, so with that being said, let's say we did 2 damage to Cleopatra. We would take her board over here and we would move this down 2. Now this is a prototype. It is a little bit tricky to move this down, so I'm just going to pop it out. But we would then move it down, and this does change all of her statistics. So she's now attacking for less, only attacking for 5. Her defense is now a 6. Her movement is only a 1, so her movement is really lowered, and her health is now 4. Meaning that we are a bit closer to killing Miss Cleopatra. Now that you know how attacking works, another thing to note is that you are also able to attack with the base attack, which you would target a specific character, but there are also area attacks, meaning that you would attack the entire area and damage all of the units there, which can be really powerful and fun depending on who's the one attacking who, I guess. But moving on, we have the scenarios. So understanding how the game is played, the scenarios will change specific things and add flavor text and things like that for you to enjoy the game more. So for example, we have here the hunt, and I'm going to read the intro to this scenario just so you can understand a little bit about how this will feel. But it says, having fled Duat, the realm of the dead, Amit is now free to roam the 2 lands. Despite her colossal mass, the creature is surprisingly stealthy, making her extremely difficult to track. Advised by Thoth, some of the gods set out to hunt her down and chain her up again, while the rest traveled to Nun to watch over the primordial world. Things become more complicated when Set and Sobek from their own clan grow tired of the god's weakness in dealing with this latest scourge. So that's a bit about what's going on and why things are happening, but here's an example of the special rules that it will add to the game. So one of them is Back from the Dead. On their turn, a player may place a previously destroyed unit in one of their deployment zones. When this happens, a player takes an Art of War card from their hand and removes it from the game. So knowing how important these Art of War cards are, removing from the game is a huge choice to be able to choose to do. But it does revive one of your units, which you wouldn't previously be able to do. So it is a really big choice, but that's an extra layer that the scenario would add to hopefully give you an edge over the opponent when you are most desperate, and hopefully it'll work out for you. Overall, in Mythic Battles, players will have a lot of fun building up their different armies, switching out the different units that they choose to use, and finding synergy with the different abilities that they have. For example, a lot of these monsters here have block, so they're able to block different actions that the other player might try to take on their turn. And like I said, Bennu over here is able to fly, so he's able to go to different terrain a lot easier than other players. And there are also people over here with bolster because they're humans, so Cleopatra is able to bolster as well as Ramses, and that will allow you to take cards for your troops out of the discard over here, making them even more powerful. So depending on the different armies that you use and whether you balance out a whole lot of traits or using specific ones that synergize together, you can have a lot of fun with the different games you'll be able to play. This has been a preview of Mythic Battles Isfet. As I said, please check out their link down below, and this was a sponsored video, and you can check out a playthrough on the channel. So keep your eyes out for that. I am Professor Meg, and I will see you all next time.